pretty bad division too, much like what we've seen from the NFC East in recent years. But we'll get around to that next year. Tampa, best team in the NFC South, but the Panthers are right there with them somehow. Carolina's defense is another dramatically better unit on a team from a year ago. And Sam Darnold absolutely looks like a different player now that he's in Carolina. He looks more comfortable in that offense, and they're making enough plays right now. Will it continue the rest of the season? I don't know. New Orleans, I thought New Orleans would still compete for this division this year. They still might, but there clearly isn't the same kind of offensive threat without Drew Brees. Alvin Kamara is their best player on offense by far, especially with Michael Thomas sitting out so far. And you didn't know what you were going to get from James Winston at quarterback. He's been okay. He had one absolutely terrible game, but the other ones, he's been a little more of a game manager. Just there hasn't been the game breaker other than Kamara to come out there and help him out. And if Kamara's having to do everything, it's not going to go very far. And, you kind of saw that in their loss to the Giants over the weekend. The best division in the NFL might be the NFC West. Arizona undefeated, Rams 3-1, Seattle, San Francisco are both 2-2. Every team in that division has a pretty good offense. I would say San Francisco is probably the least deep offense. They're still kind of building up their receiving core. Deebo Samuel's pretty good, but other than that, there's a lot of inconsistencies. You haven't really seen anybody step up there to help out him and Kittle, and Shanahan kind of likes to run the ball a little bit. With Garoppolo possibly out for a little bit, Trey Lance is going to have to show us that he is a day one NFL starter. I don't think he's a day one NFL starter. I think he's eventually an NFL starter and a very good quarterback. So that might hold San Francisco back a little bit. Seattle's defense is probably the worst one in the division. Wouldn't say it's terrible, but it's no Legion of Boom. They definitely need something like that defense to keep that in this, because they have the quarterback Russell Wilson. They have the receivers in DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. I just don't think they have quite enough to keep up with the Rams and the Cardinals, especially when you can attack their secondary on basically any play. But regardless, I think this is going to be a very, very close divisional race. Could see as many as 3 or 4 teams from this division in the playoffs, to be honest, especially with that expanded third wild card that came in last year. We'll just have to see how it goes. So those are my thoughts on the NFL season as we enter into October. In the NBA, Kyrie Irving has not been able to practice with the Brooklyn Nets because in New York you need to be vaccinated for COVID to be able to practice. Now, I'm not a political person, so I'm not going to say, hey, he's got to get vaccinated, or hey, don't get vaccinated. Ultimately, from my perspective, it's your choice and what you feel is right. So I'm not going to tell him what is right. But the situation seems like it could hurt the team, especially from a chemistry and familiarity standpoint. He was out for a big chunk of last season as well. And the Nets are considered one of the favorites for the NBA title. The familiarity, team chemistry off the court can be a huge part of indicating the performance that will happen on the court. And time away from that team, you don't know how long it's going to be, but a decent amount of time away from that team could hinder the development and hinder how he's able to gel with and play with his teammates. I'm not talking about whether his teammates like him or not. I'm not talking about personalities. I'm talking about just straight up familiarity, knowing each other's games, knowing how to play together. And when you're missing time like he is, and you're not getting that time to play and practice together, then it becomes more of an issue, and that's when rust can come into play. And just in tonight, literally as I was writing tonight's show, the Cowboys have released former Pro Bowl linebacker and former second-round pick from Notre Dame, Jaylon Smith. Smith was drafted in 2017, again, second round. There were a lot of people who thought he could go in the top 10 until he suffered a significant, I believe it was a knee injury in the bowl game for Notre Dame that year. Dallas took a shot on him in the second round, and he became a Pro Bowler in 2019, and it looked like the Cowboys had this stellar group of young linebackers with him and Leighton Vander Esch coming up to lead the defense. But now at just 26 years old, he is on the free agent market. I would expect there to be a pretty sizable market for him. He has had his struggle on the field outside of that Pro Bowl 2019 season, but he's got a lot of speed. Change of scenery could help him out a lot. Chip on the shoulder could help his performance, his determination, and he's definitely a talented enough player to get another shot somewhere. It'll just depend what his market is and where he feels is the best fit. So that's all we're going to have for this week's episode of the Travis on Sports podcast. I know it was probably a bit of a shorter one. Again, slow news cycle, but next week's episode will also cover the start of the NBA and NHL seasons, along with the usual amount of sports news. So that should be a much more normal episode. But until then, again, you can find all our previous episodes and this episode, obviously, on Spreaker, Apple Podcast, Spotify, Twitter, Facebook, and our Travis on Sports YouTube channel. As always, please be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time on the Travis on Sports podcast. Thank you for listening.